I once rented a room in a small house in Hartford, Connecticut. This house was actually quite nice, with hardwood floors and a stove that heated the entire house during winter. You walked up some flat, circular stone steps to access the front door, and the landlady had a pretty garden out front. The back of the house was a bit of a mess, and she had, as I soon discovered, a hoarding disorder. Although I could see her home was cluttered, I simply needed a place to stay. One entire room was blocked off because she had so much stuff in it. Still, the room I was renting was charming and the bed was comfortable. I shared it with her and her one child, who was still in school. The bathroom was large enough to share and there was a washer and dryer and Wi-Fi. Another person briefly rented the room downstairs before she bounced and checked out. I started having odd experiences in this house. It had an aura of stress to it. For instance, one night, I was alone in the house, as the landlady had gone to spend the weekend with her fiancé. It was cold enough that she put wood chips in the stove before leaving. I enjoyed watching the flickering in the darkness. The living room took on a calmer feeling, like the fire inside the stove began to stir. All of a sudden, I had the awful feeling that someone was standing next to me. Spooked, I went upstairs into my room and shut the door. The next weird experience came when I was doing laundry in her messy basement. By this time, I was growing tired of the incredible mess. She kept the living room tidy, but that was about it. I wandered around the dark room as the washer spun, then stopped in a kind of odd horror. Someone had sprayed painted the words "fuck" in blood on the back of the steps. Entirely chilled, I found my Bible and prayed over the words. I wondered if Satanists had lived in the house or witches at one point. I started to feel like I was living in the presence of evil. The room I was staying in grew colder, night after night, literally. I began to feel like I was suffocating and struggled to sleep. One night, I rolled over, sleepy and chilled, and looked at the digital alarm clock. It was around 4:20 a.m. I looked towards the window at the far end of the room, where she kept a round, mirrored coffee table. There was a dark mass there, with no face, just staring at me. I could see curly hair, but no distinct features. It was hovering, almost as if it was lying on its side. I screamed and turned on the light. I asked my landlady the next day if she had heard me screaming, but she denied it. I knew she had once been married to a man who evidently had abused her. When I spoke to her boyfriend, I decided to take a risk. I inquired about my landlady's husband, who was now deceased. Her fiancé told me that the neighbors had described him as evil. I hesitated when I asked if he had curly hair. He replied in the affirmative. I am convinced that I saw some sort of imprint of this person, manifested at a spiritual sensitivity, which I had possessed for most of my life. Later on, I saw a photo of this husband and the landlady's child. He indeed had dark curly hair. This happened to me when I was about 10 years old, and it still haunts me. This was around 1969 or 1970, and pop bottles was how us kids came up with money for candy or whatever. I would search everywhere for them. Construction sites were gold mines. I would regularly search abandoned properties. I was a little braver than my friends, so I would always have a little more money to show for my efforts. There was a large and creepy house, by itself on the outside of our neighborhood in our small little town, that was clearly abandoned. I never went in there. Something about it just felt different and a little scary, even to me. But having nothing to show for my pop bottle search, I decided to quickly check it out. I should have stuck with my instincts, but I ignored them and went in, which was a big mistake. The walls were painted an awful shade of green, even the ceilings, but the chilling thing was the mirrors. There must have been hundreds of them. They were literally everywhere. Many were in the floor broken, and you couldn't even walk through without stepping on pieces of them. They were of all sizes and shapes, hanging on wires or frames, or just stands or shelves, or just leaning against the walls. You could see all around you, and every room you went. I never imagined something like this, and it blew my mind. I couldn't process what I was seeing because it horrified me. My heart started pounding and I felt dizzy. It was way too much, and I got out of there, and I didn't think my feet even touched the steps leaving the place. I sat by a tree for a long time and got myself together before going home. I was soaking wet from sweating and feeling very sick. I will never know who put those mirrors up or what they were afraid of, but that image has stayed with me my entire life. I even hate the shade of green when I see it. They had a house of mirrors at a fair, and just looking at it made me sick. Even at a department store that has a large display of backed by mirrors, I have to look away. My days of exploring abandoned places have come to an end. You never know what's going to be on inside. It might just give you a phobia you're stuck with for the rest of your life. This happened back when I was 12 or 13 years old. Now, a little backstory here. My dad and I volunteered at a bird banding station. If you don't know what bird banding is, it is where researchers put small metal bands on the legs of birds, and then release them, to track their migration patterns. We'd set out mist nets in the woods to catch the birds. We used nets instead of traditional traps so we wouldn't harm the birds. So anyway, the guy who owned the bird banding station and the entire property, let's call him R, would let me wander the woods, while he was collecting birds out of the nets. R's property was massive, with woods, countryside, marshland, and you name it, all out here on the edge of a small town. Now back to the story. It was a cool summer morning. I was wandering in my usual part of the forest. It wasn't long before I noticed that it was unusually silent, which was odd. I usually hear at least one thrush or blue jay, but there was nothing. All of a sudden in the distance, I hear what sounds like a distressed baby deer or a cat. Being the curious animal lover I was, I followed the noise. However, as I got closer to the sound, it seemed to grow a lot farther away. It wasn't long before I came to the edge of R's property. The wailing sounded like it was coming from nearby 1 minute, and then sounding very far away the next. Despite being confused and a little creeped out, I for some reason still followed it. However, a few minutes later, I came across a small deer blind. I looked inside to see if anyone was messing with me, but there was nobody there. When I got a better look at the blind, I noticed something a bit off. There were massive slashes on the sides. They looked as if a person had slashed them with a knife, or an animal's claw marks. But there were no bears in this part of Michigan. Odd. So being a curious 13-year-old, I continued on my way to finding this distressed animal. I was walking along the edge of R's woods, trying not to go too far. I'm starting to get frustrated. Where the heck was this scream coming from? So being the naive little girl I was, I mimicked the noise that I was hearing to try to find my way back to the animal, to see if it would show itself. Not a minute passes by and I hear a noise that I will never forget. It sounded like a dog's growl, mixed with a buck's grunt. No deer sounded like this though. Something in my brain told me to get the heck out of there, and I did, leaping over twigs and branches until I'm in R's front yard. As I'm making my way towards his house, I hear the same sound, growling, coming from the woods, about 10 meters behind me at the very least. So instead, I run towards the research sack. Since R wasn't at the house and the doors would most likely be locked, I knew that no one would believe me. So I just said that a deer growled at me. However, I've heard deer grunts and snorts all my life, and they do not even compare to the animal that I heard. It didn't sound like a coyote or a dog either. Although, I never saw the thing. I believe that it was trying to get me off the property to do who knows what. I'm guessing that it might have been a Wendigo, since they can mimic noises of other animals and even voices. I also live near the Great Lakes, a hot spot for Wendigo sightings, maybe even a skinwalker, but they tend to be more in the western states. So, whenever you're in the woods and something doesn't seem right, don't just brush it off. It was summer of 2018, and like many others, I went on vacation to a place somewhat isolated from people, just to get away. I had gone with my 2 cousins to a ranch we own in Lake Perris, California. For reference, I will call one M and the older one J. M being the same age as me at 24, and J at 28. I had been planning to go visit them for almost 3 years, but I hadn't gotten the chance, due to transportation and always having to work. I only had just gotten the chance to be able to travel because I had crashed my brand new Ninja motorcycle in September of 2017, breaking my collarbone and 3 of my ribs, rendering me unable to work. While recovering, I was living in the Bay Area by San Francisco, and to think I wanted to ride 8 to 10 hours out to my family's ranch on a bike, that would have been suicide, since I'm not at all familiar with the roads. Anyways, I had finally gone to visit, and I thought it was going to take much of my stress away. In many ways, it did. But during my time there, it seemed like things just started to get worse. Not only did my girl dump me, but strange things started happening again, like my uncle's mom passing away, and, along with my cousin M that was sitting next to me at the time, seeing her spirit late one night at around 2 a.m. We both started to see weird things. We both turned to each other one night to see something peeking into the room at the same time, and I asked him, "Did you see that?" I stood up to see if it was my other cousin trying to creep us out. When I walked out the door, I saw my great-aunt's face and top torso turning and fading away into thin air. I automatically ran into the room on my tippy toes and both hands on my chest, repeating what I saw to her over and over again. Well, 2 days after, in between everything that was happening at the time, me and my cousin Jay decided to go smoke a bowl under the large evergreen tree in the back, by where all the cow, chickens, and goats are kept, with the intention of avoiding my aunts and uncles smelling what we were up to, out of respect. So, it was a bright sunny day. I and Jay, along with our huge all-black 200-pound Great Dane Abigail, was just chilling on a wooden bench under the evergreen. Staring out to some of the hills, where there were no more or 2 or 3 miles away, I noticed a large black horse, pacing side to side in the middle of the 2 biggest hills, behind what looked like a barbed wire fence that ran along the top of the hills, pairing the sides of the old abandoned building that looked like it was used to be a slaughterhouse. Really thinking nothing of it, I looked at the dog laying in front of us, whose head and ears were both aiming straight up at the black figure, high up between the hills. When I realized just how long that thing had been there, I had seen it come up from the hills about 15 or 20 minutes earlier, and Abigail had not taken her eyes off of it the entire time. So I turned to my cousin to tell him about the horse, and if he had ever seen it there before, just to find him frozen with the bong and lighter in his hands, also looking right at it. He had this look of terror on his face. When I looked back towards the thing, I saw it was standing on its 2 back legs and facing right at us. Its front legs were side by side as it was trying to intimidate us or something. We were all just frozen, including the dog. She didn't make a move. I think either she was used to it or she felt safe with having us around. After almost a minute of looking at it, it seemed to shrink before our eyes, till it almost looked human-like. When I said to Jay, "Holy crap, I think that might be a skinwalker," he quickly responded by telling me to shut up and to ignore it. He almost begged me to be quiet. It went from what looked like a 10-foot tall creature thing to like 6 foot in only a few seconds. Judging by the old building only about 100 yards away from it, I know these things and what they are capable of. I'm Mexican born in California, but Mexican culture has a big part of my life. Along with its folklore and older stories of witchcraft and people who practice its deeper roots, Mexican culture is right up there next to Native American culture, if not the same. I'm scared to even mention any of this to anyone, but it's good for a cause. It's time that people know the truths and secrets of humans and unhuman things that are so oblivious to humanity. To that thing dwelling in the hills of Lake Paris, stay the hell away from our family, and hopefully I'll never have to see this thing again. Also, importance to the evergreen tree that we were at. The evergreen tree is known to be used by witch doctors in Mexico to keep evil and bad spirits away. Maybe not just a coincidence that there is a big-ass one in the middle of our ranch. I don't know why, but that dog would not leave my side for 2.5 weeks when I was there. Even my cousins pointed it out. Jay also told me that I'm weird, but in a good way, whatever that means.